Hi, my name is Don Boldt, and welcome to the 10-Minute Parent. What we'll be doing is teaching you biblical parenting in 5 to 10-minute segments over YouTube. And so I just want to welcome you and say that today we're going to be covering a topic which is taking the long-range perspective. I don't know if you ever thought about this or noticed this in Scripture, but the Bible's divided up into different kinds of scriptures. All right, some of them are history. Genesis, okay, Leviticus, Exodus, Deuteronomy. You start looking at these are all history. Samuel, Kings, Chronicles. These are all historical books. They contain teaching for us, and they tell us about the things that God has done. But that's one part of the Scriptures. There's another part of the Scriptures which is written in poetic fashion. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon. These are all written as poetry. Now again, they're what are called wisdom books, which are intended to teach us things. I'm not trying to say that they're just poetry to entertain us, but that's another part of the Scriptures. But this taking the long-range perspective, what it comes from is that God gave to us prophecy. Well, why did God give us prophecy? Well, because He wanted us to live our lives taking this long-range perspective, where we believe that we know, because God has shown us the things that are going to happen. Well, what about taking that approach and raising your children, taking this long-range perspective? And I'm going to introduce you to a little statement that I hope will stick with you, which is that as parents, you are not raising children, you're raising adults. All right, to understand that I'm not raising a child to be a child, I'm raising a child to be an adult. How far will your parenting reach? You want your parenting to reach to future generations. You want your children to be so powerfully impacted by the way you raise them that they'll raise their children in a way that is different than they might have if you hadn't raised them the way that you did. One of the reasons that you want to take this long-range perspective is because it's more effective, but I want you to understand there's going to be times when you're wondering, why do I have to do all this hard work? And if you think it's just raising a child to be a child, that might not be enough motivation. But when you start understanding, I'm raising my great-grandchildren's grandparents, okay, maybe that'll give you a little bit more of an understanding that this is important and I really have to give myself wholeheartedly to raising my children. So let's talk about taking this long-range perspective and what does it mean for you as a parent who's trying to raise their children in a way that agrees with what God said. So first of all, in many cultures, and I'm going to speak to American culture here as one that I know very, very well. I grew up in it and have raised my children in it, and now raising grandchildren, through, helping my children with their children. And what it is that this idea of at what point do we expect a child to mature? All right, and this is one of the first things that you want to think about when you start, thinking about this long-range perspective that I'm going to take with my children. And so, we had a goal, which was that we wanted to see all of the characteristics of maturity in our children by age 12. All right, now you might say, wow, they aren't adults by age 12. No, they aren't adults, but they don't have all those qualities complete in them, but they have the beginnings of them. So diligence. All of our children had learned to be hardworking by the time they were 12. Respectful. All of our children had learned to be respectful by the time they were 12. Now, were they perfect in all these things? No. Did we have to remind them? Absolutely. But the characteristics were there. And you would hear this in feedback from people. Wow, I sat down, I was talking with your son or daughter, and I felt like I was talking with somebody much older than they are. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? And they weren't saying, well, we talked about old things. They were saying, no, it's just the mature way that they are able to carry a conversation. Communication skills. What kind of communication skills do you want your children to have? Thinking skills. Do you want them to think like adults? Well, yeah, but by what age? All right, so the one thing that I want to look at is very positively to understand that we are trying to produce this maturity in them so that when they go looking for a job, when they go looking for a partner in life, when they step out into something that they believe God has for them to do, we can feel free to release them into it because we know that we've prepared them for it. In Proverbs 29:18, it says that without a vision, the people are unrestrained, or they dwell carelessly. All right, they don't moderate their behavior. They don't allow themselves to be guided in those times because they don't see where we're going with all of this. And so taking the long-range perspective also gives you the opportunity to communicate to your children why it is that they need to learn all these things. I mean, a funny conversation that would take place between my daughter and I from time to time. I would be instructing her to go and clean her room, and and I'd come and I'd be wanting her to be very, very meticulous with what she was doing. She'd, oh, Dad, why do I have to do all this work? And I'd say, well, because I don't want your husband calling me one day and saying, what kind of girl did you raise? Because, the house is a mess, and it's like she's just, she's got junk all over the place. And she just looked at me, because she was like 8 years old, and she said, oh, Dad, that seems silly to her. But, you have to understand that like 12 years later, she was walking down the aisle, all right? And so it didn't seem silly at that point that we had taken that long range perspective when she was little, but to help them to understand, you're going to have a job someday. You're learning to be diligent in pursuit of that. I'd like to take this a little different direction for the last couple of minutes that we're talking about this, and talk about a tendency that we want to try to overthrow in ourselves, which is to see a quality in a child and make one of two mistakes. To either think, well, something that they're doing that's wrong is funny, okay, because sometimes to see a little child doing something that's a little bit precocious, a little bit, beyond their years, even though it's wrong, it seems funny to us, so we laugh at it and we let it go. But I want to encourage you that in those moments, you might want to think about, what is that behavior going to look like in a 12-year-old? What is that behavior going to look like in a 16-year-old? Because if you're encouraging it now and letting it go and think, well, it's funny, or that sort of thing, and of course children, they like the positive attention, and so, for them to get into their hearts somehow this is a good thing, take the long-range perspective. The other part of this is just to understand that with that child, when I see some quality or behavior, something that they're doing in them, to say, well, okay, what do I need to do now so that I don't have to be wrestling with this later? My son-in-law is a great big guy, and sometimes people say, well, when do you start to deal with these things? I say, well, let me ask you a question. If you had to have a wrestling match with my son-in-law, would you have wanted to have it with him when he was 2 or now? All right, and the obvious answer is when he was 2. And so saying, well, I'm going to address these things at a young age with my children, so that when we get to those later dates, we'll have a little bit easier time of addressing these things because we've been doing it right along. The key here is diligence, and diligence in the book of Proverbs means start early, work hard, and work often. And with that, I'm going to say God bless you, and we'll see you next time around.